Hi, this is Jim Johansson with New Hope Academy, and I wanted to give a little bit more of an introduction to what's going to be covered in the early church history course that we'll be offering this fall, and for those that will be looking at that remotely, either concurrently with our class or in the future. There's such a wealth of experience that we have from our early church fathers that we can get a chance to benefit from, and we're going to be talking about that. And what happened, as you probably know, that the disciples were there with Jesus during his ministry on earth, and Jesus had that small group of people that he invested in, and that small group was very much he helped them in their spiritual formation, promised the Holy Spirit that was going to fulfill them, and help them in their ministry. And we can start to trace that as that happened from generation to generation, spiritual generation to spiritual generation. And what was happening is you could see that spiritual lineage that you could be looking at your family tree per se of how that started to happen. And we'll get a chance to see some of those lives that were changed. For example, Polycarp is maybe a name that you've heard, someone that was a disciple of John, and how what happened is initially who was an eyewitness that experienced the things that Christ did when he was on earth, and they would hear those stories, and then they would start to be who heard or was a disciple of those that were witnesses of Jesus in his ministry on earth, and then it went on from a few generations from that. So some of these great individuals, Irenaeus is an example of someone. One of the threats that they experienced in the early church was something called Gnosticism. And so it was a heretical combination of Greek philosophy, and there was an intermingling of that in the church. So how do you stay true to the things of the Lord, the things that what we're called to be in terms of faithful believers, and stay away from these things that are very commonly experienced in the culture? So we'll get a chance to look at things like that. There were two schools of thought early on in church history in terms of theological development. There was the school of Antioch, which was where Paul started his ministry, and so it had a very early Christian heritage that was there. And there was also the school in Alexandria in where Egypt is today, and that was a school where folks like Origen began to develop his perspectives and was very voracious and wrote quite a lot, and we have that testimony for us today. And so we'll talk a little bit about those two schools, how that aligned with the Roman Empire, that where church history started was sort of in the decline of the Roman Empire. But there was something called the Pax Romana, where there was a tremendous peace per se as the Roman Empire kind of reached the full extent of where it was at. And it started to break down. Eventually there was a breakdown between the East and West Roman Empire and the church. As it started to develop, there was an East and a West split that started to happen. So other individuals that you may have heard of, Augustine is one of the greats that we know about, and we'll get a chance to talk about him. Jerome, one of the first individuals that was instrumental in writing the Bible, and in that time was writing the Bible, the whole text in Latin. That was a key thing that was there. One of the individuals that I liked, that I studied when I was in school with one of my professors that I had a lot of respect for, was Hippolytus. And he was a person that was sort of in the transition between what was a Greek history to what began to be the Latin history of the church. And as the theological constructs were developing, what is the nature of Christ? What is the nature of the Trinity? Things like that that was starting to be discussed. He was wanted to make sure that the truth of what it means to be a believer and what was being institutionalized in the church was faithfully represented. And so he makes a big emphasis in that in terms of his ministry, even saying that if the church is not going to follow, then he was willing to break away from that, and for a short period of time to make that point, he actually did. There's an interesting two words in German that describe what history is. And first is the word historia, which talks about what are the facts. But there's also another word called Geschichte, which is talking about the telling. And so what we're going to be doing in this class is doing the telling of what is the fabric of this church history that we know about. And I'm going to be leveraging what the Geschichte, if you will, the telling that other people have spoken about these things, the things that are important for us all to know. And so it's going to be a wonderful experience for us together, experience a story, to let these people tell their story to us. And there was a lot of persecution in the early church where people died for their faith, that it was actually against the law. It was a criminal offense to be a Christian unless you denounced your faith, that you would be martyred. And so a lot of the church fathers experienced that. All the disciples experienced tremendous persecution, and yes, they persevered in their faith. And the kind of character and what was formed in those individuals is quite phenomenal. So I tried to give a little bit of an example of some of those individuals. There's plenty more I could be talking about. And I look forward to doing that either with you face-to-face in this class or afterwards if you want to view it remotely and be in touch with us. Like myself, being one of the professors, one of the instructors at the New Hope Academy. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.